Have you ever wondered what happens when personal rage crashes into the cold walls of corporate power? In late 2024, a story unfolded that shocked the business world, the justice system, and millions of ordinary Americans. A single act of violence, one man, one gun, one CEO lying on a cold Manhattan street, shattered the illusion that grievances, no matter how deep, stay bottled up in boardrooms and protests. Today, we're diving into the extraordinary true crime saga of Luigi Mangione, a 26-year-old once described as brilliant, quiet, and tormented. A man who, according to federal prosecutors, didn't just lose faith in the American healthcare system, he allegedly declared war on it. His target? Brian Thompson, the CEO of UnitedHealthcare, one of the largest health insurance companies in the world. A man seen by some as a titan of industry, and by others as the living face of everything wrong with healthcare in America. On a cold December morning, as Thompson made his way to an investors' conference in Midtown Manhattan, someone was waiting. 3 gunshots cracked through the air, swift, clinical, deliberate. Within minutes, Thompson was gone. The killer vanished. A 5-day manhunt stretched across states. The nation watched, stunned, as authorities scrambled, conspiracy theories exploded online, and the pressure to find the shooter mounted. When Luigi Mangione was finally captured hundreds of miles away in Pennsylvania, carrying a fake ID, a firearm, and a chilling manifesto, the narrative exploded beyond a simple murder case. It became a collision of personal suffering, corporate resentment, ideological warfare, and national outrage. Was this an act of madness or a twisted, desperate cry for justice? Was Mangione a lone wolf, a symbol, or something even more dangerous? Today, we unravel the entire story from Luigi's privileged beginnings and quiet suffering to the final violent act that has left America divided. A story where ambition, anger, and broken systems collided in the most devastating way possible. Buckle up, because nothing about this case is simple. Before Luigi Mangione's name dominated national headlines, before the green sweaters, the protest signs, and the heated debates, he was just another kid from Maryland. Born into a middle-class family in the suburbs of Baltimore, Luigi grew up surrounded by the quiet expectations of American success. Study hard, go to a good school, make your family proud. And at first, he did exactly that. At his prestigious private high school, Luigi wasn't just another student, he was the student, valedictorian, a natural in math, computers, and critical thinking. A kid who wasn't loud or flashy, but one who left teachers quietly whispering, he's going to do something big one day. He went on to the University of Pennsylvania, one of the Ivy League's crown jewels, majoring in computer science. But while his academic record soared, something inside Luigi began to fracture. Throughout his college years and into his 20s, he battled chronic physical pain, severe, debilitating back issues that left him exhausted, frustrated, and at times hopeless. Doctors' visits piled up, treatments failed, and worst of all, dealing with the insurance system. Denied claims, endless delays, dismissive letters from corporations that barely saw him as human. For someone as brilliant and as wounded as Luigi, it wasn't just annoying. It felt like betrayal. He spiraled. Luigi took extended trips to Hawaii, to Asia, seeking peace, perhaps, or maybe just escape. He became increasingly isolated, writing obsessively online about books, philosophy, politics, pain. He even reviewed the Unabomber's Manifesto on Goodreads, a chilling hint of the darkness brewing inside him. In late 2024, just weeks before the shooting, Luigi's mother called the police in San Francisco. She filed a missing persons report. Her brilliant, broken son had disappeared. And then he reappeared in the worst way imaginable. On the surface, Brian Thompson was the embodiment of corporate success. Born and raised in Minnesota, Thompson worked his way up from modest beginnings to the pinnacle of American business. CEO of UnitedHealthcare, one of the largest and most controversial health insurance giants in the world. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't a celebrity CEO like some tech moguls. Brian kept a low profile, focusing on operations, investors, and the bottom line. But that bottom line, it made UnitedHealthcare a powerhouse and made Thompson a very, very wealthy man. By 2024, his salary, bonuses, and stock awards placed him among the highest paid executives in the health sector. For the corporate world, he was a model leader, organized, disciplined, focused. For millions of ordinary Americans tangled in complicated medical bills and denied insurance claims, he symbolized something else: the cold, brutal machinery of for-profit healthcare. UnitedHealthcare, like many big insurance firms, faced lawsuits and investigations accused of delaying or denying coverage, pushing up premiums, and prioritizing shareholder profits over patient care. Some critics said Thompson personally oversaw policies that led to real human suffering. Others defended him, arguing he was simply playing the game that the American system demanded. In 2024, as healthcare costs soared and frustrations across the country boiled over, Thompson became willingly or not the face of a deeply broken system. And on December 4th, as he left a hotel in Midtown Manhattan heading toward an investors' meeting, he became a target. What he didn't know that morning was that someone had already decided he was guilty, not in a court of law, but in the mind of a young man convinced that action, deadly action, was the only way left to be heard. December 4th, 2024. It was supposed to be a routine morning in Manhattan. Brian Thompson, CEO of UnitedHealthcare, was preparing for a high-stakes investors conference, the kind of event that could swing billions of dollars. He left his hotel just after 8 a.m., dressed sharply, coffee in hand, stepping onto the bustling streets of Midtown. But someone else was already there. According to investigators, Luigi Mangione had been tracking Thompson. He wasn't acting randomly, it was precise, targeted. Witnesses later said they saw a figure loitering across the street, dressed casually, blending into the New York morning rush. No shouting, no confrontation. Just 3 quick pops so fast that some bystanders thought they were construction sounds. In reality, they were gunshots. Brian Thompson collapsed almost instantly on the sidewalk outside the hotel's awning. Paramedics rushed to the scene, but there was little they could do. He was declared deceased minutes later. The shooter disappeared into the chaos of Manhattan. In a city famous for surveillance, it still took investigators crucial hours to piece together a trail: surveillance footage, street cameras, snippets from taxis and delivery trucks. The urgency skyrocketed. A high-profile CEO shot dead in broad daylight in one of the busiest cities in the world. This wasn't just murder. It was a message. But what was it trying to say? Meanwhile, inside a crumpled notebook later recovered by police, investigators would find chilling clues. A declaration of hostility toward the healthcare industry, references to the injustice of denied claims, an almost manifesto-like rage that hinted this was no random act. After Brian Thompson was shot dead in broad daylight, New York City flipped into crisis mode. The NYPD flooded Midtown. Helicopters hovered. FBI agents joined the case almost immediately. Every street camera, every license plate reader, every bit of digital surveillance all pointed at one mission: find the shooter. but whoever pulled the trigger had vanished like smoke. Day 1. Investigators combed through hours of surveillance footage, hunting for a face, a jacket, a car, anything. The only clue: a man slipping into a nearby subway station minutes after the shooting. From there, he could be anywhere. Day 2. The shooter's image, blurry and grainy, was leaked to law enforcement networks. Meanwhile, FBI profilers began analyzing the crime. This wasn't a robbery. It wasn't personal beef. It was targeted. It was symbolic. Day 3. In Pennsylvania, nearly 270 miles away, police responded to a McDonald's worker who flagged a suspicious customer. A man acting paranoid, using cash, fidgeting nervously. When officers arrived, they found a fake ID, a 3D printed firearm, and a chilling handwritten claim of responsibility. The man, Luigi Mangione. Day 4. Authorities raced to confirm. Forensic ballistics linked the 9mm handgun found on Mangione to the bullets that ended Thompson's life. Inside Mangione's backpack, they also found a notebook. Pages filled with furious writings about health insurance companies, corporate greed, and perceived systemic oppression. Day 5. The arrest went public. News outlets across the country exploded with headlines. CEO killed in targeted attack. Healthcare rage turns deadly. Luigi Mangione, terror or tragedy? And the public, already divided on healthcare issues, suddenly had to face a villain to condemn or a victim of a broken system to mourn. In a spectacular show of force, Mangione was extradited from Pennsylvania back to New York under heavy armed guard. Jet planes, helicopters, television cameras captured every second, every handcuff click. It wasn't just a manhunt anymore. It was a media circus, and the battle for public opinion had officially begun. When officers arrested Luigi Mangione inside that McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania, they didn't just find a suspect. They found a treasure trove of evidence that would turn a confusing investigation into a bulletproof case. First, the fake ID. The name on it wasn't Luigi's, but authorities quickly realized it was the same ID used by the shooter spotted near the Manhattan Hotel just before the murder. Second, the weapon. A black 9mm handgun, small enough to conceal easily. But not just any gun, it was a 3D printed firearm, modified and untraceable. A chilling sign of modern criminal tactics. Ballistics testing later confirmed it beyond any reasonable doubt. The shell casings recovered from the crime scene matched the unique markings on Mangione's weapon. And then came the most disturbing discovery: a small, battered notebook. Inside were handwritten pages, furious, chaotic, and dark. He wrote about feeling invisible. He detailed years of battling insurance companies over claims. He ranted about systemic cruelty, calling the American healthcare system a machine of profit built on human misery. Authorities also found a claim of responsibility, a short scrawled letter that didn't name Thompson specifically, but railed against those who profit by denying the suffering of others. It was personal. It was political. And prosecutors believed it showed premeditation, turning what could have been seen as a crime of passion into a calculated, ideologically fueled attack. Adding to the horror were the shell casings recovered at the murder scene. Each casing was manually engraved with a word: delay, deny, depose. 3 words that perfectly summed up Mangione's twisted view of the insurance industry and left a signature at the scene that investigators called an unmistakable message. Within 72 hours of his arrest, federal prosecutors had prepared the blueprint for their case: targeted assassination, premeditation, political terrorism. Mangione's defense attorneys immediately went on the offensive, arguing that the search of his belongings had violated his constitutional rights. They filed motions to suppress the evidence, the gun, the notebook, the claim of responsibility, hoping to cripple the prosecution's case before it ever reached a jury. But by then, the story had already exploded far beyond the courtroom. Public opinion was splintered. Was Mangione a terrorist, a madman, or the inevitable result of a broken system no one wants to fix? And could any defense, no matter how passionate, undo the mountain of evidence now stacked against him? Just days after his arrest, Luigi Mangione was transported back to New York under circumstances that felt more like a scene from a movie than a real-world extradition. Flanked by armed federal agents, helicopters overhead, armored vehicles waiting on the tarmac. The level of security wasn't just about moving a suspect. It was about sending a message. This was not a normal case. Once in Manhattan, Mangione was paraded in a perp walk, heavily shackled, face stoic with cameras flashing and news anchors narrating every step. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Reporters, spectators, protesters, and counter-protesters filled the gallery. Security was tight. Everyone wanted to see the man accused of assassinating one of America's most powerful CEOs. Mangione appeared before Judge Margaret Garnett in a beige prison jumpsuit, shackled at the wrists and ankles. He sat quietly, scribbling notes furiously on a yellow legal pad as the charges were read. First-degree murder. Terrorism charges under New York law. Firearms offenses. And in federal court, murder through the use of a firearm, a charge that carried the possibility of the death penalty. When asked for his plea, Mangione's voice was steady, almost mechanical. Not guilty. His defense attorney, Karen Friedman Agnifilo, a seasoned and high-profile legal veteran, immediately made it clear. They would be fighting everything. Behind the scenes, her team was already filing motions challenging the legality of Mangione's arrest and the admissibility of the evidence collected against him. They argued that Luigi had been illegally searched, that his writings were being unfairly characterized, and that media coverage had already poisoned any chance of a fair trial. But the government had its own plans. In a bombshell announcement, the Justice Department confirmed it would seek capital punishment, something rare in federal cases, especially involving ideological crimes. This wasn't just a trial about one man anymore. It was a political battle over health care, corporate power, justice, and the limits of American rage. Outside the courtroom, the divide was just as sharp. Supporters wore Free Luigi scarves and waved banners, framing him as a symbol of resistance. Opponents, including healthcare workers and corporate representatives, called him a terrorist and demanded the harshest possible sentence. As the gavel struck and the session adjourned, it became clear. This case was not going to quietly fade away. It would become a war fought in courtrooms, in the streets, and on every news feed in America. Almost overnight, Luigi Mangione became a household name. But what he represented depended entirely on who you asked. For many, he was a cold-blooded criminal, someone who had crossed the ultimate line, taking a life to make a statement. News commentators called him a domestic terrorist, a radical extremist, and a dangerous precedent for political violence. Public officials, including governors and senators, lined up to condemn him. In America, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro declared, "We do not kill to express our anger." The message was clear. Whatever the failures of the healthcare system, violence would never be justified. But in the cracks of American society, online forums, grassroots movements, social media hashtags, a very different picture was being painted. There, Luigi Mangione wasn't a villain. He was a symbol, a tragic embodiment of frustration against a system that millions felt had failed them. Hashtags like #FreeLuigi, #HealthcareMartyr, and #Unthreaded Penalty exploded across platforms like Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit. Fundraisers to support his legal defense raised over $900,000 in just weeks. Protesters appeared outside courthouses wearing green, a nod to the Nintendo character Luigi, carrying banners that read, "Luigi before fascists, stop corporate murder. Healthcare shouldn't cost your life." At one protest, a chilling spectacle caught national attention. A fake skeleton dressed in a green shirt and blue overalls, Mangione's trademark protest color, sitting in a mock electric chair. A brutal commentary on the death penalty debate raging alongside his case. Even high-profile figures like Chelsea Manning, famous for leaking classified government files, appeared publicly to show solidarity at Mangione's court hearings. Across the country, a fierce debate raged. Was Luigi Mangione a monster who destroyed a family and shattered trust in civil society? Or was he a symptom, a flashing red warning sign from a generation crushed by medical debt, denied basic care, and pushed past the breaking point? America, already exhausted by political division, economic insecurity, and healthcare crises, found itself confronting an uncomfortable truth. Luigi Mangione was not easily dismissed. He had forced a national conversation, not by lobbying, not by voting, but by violence. And whether people liked it or not, he had become a symbol bigger than himself. The moment Luigi Mangione's arrest hit the headlines, politicians didn't hesitate. In a country already boiling over with debates about healthcare, inequality, and political violence, Mangione's case was a live wire, and everyone scrambled to grab it first. Governor Josh Shapiro was among the first to issue a public statement calling the murder an unacceptable act of political violence and vowing that Pennsylvania would fully cooperate in Mangione's prosecution. New York officials followed suit. Mayor Eric Adams called the assassination a cowardly attack on the rule of law. Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch stood beside him, emphasizing that the NIPT's swift work had prevented potential further harm. But behind the podiums and press conferences, a deeper political game was underway. The Department of Justice, under direct orders from Attorney General Pam Bondi, made a rare, aggressive move, announcing that the federal government would seek capital punishment against Mangione. In an era when federal death penalty cases had become extremely rare, this was a bombshell. It wasn't just about punishing a killer. It was about making an example. Mangione's case was framed by prosecutors as a warning shot. No matter how broken you think the system is, you do not take justice into your own hands. Meanwhile, advocacy groups lit up with fury. Organizations that opposed the death penalty immediately mobilized, arguing that executing Mangione would turn him into a martyr and deepen America's political wounds. Cable news split predictably. Some networks painted Mangione as a dangerous terrorist, the logical conclusion of unchecked online radicalization. Others framed him as a tragic figure, a young man crushed by a healthcare system designed to fail those without power. Politicians debated not just Mangione's guilt, but what he represented. Was he a lone wolf, a domestic terrorist, a vigilante in a broken society? Every label was a weapon in the larger political war. And every day the case dragged on, it seemed to mirror and magnify America's own fractures. As one legal analyst put it bluntly on live TV, Luigi Mangione didn't just kill a CEO, he cracked open the soul of a very sick country. And with federal prosecutors now gunning for the death penalty, the stakes had never been higher. Mangione wasn't just fighting for his freedom anymore, he was fighting for his life. As Luigi Mangione sat behind bars awaiting trial, his name didn't fade from public consciousness. It grew louder and stranger. High-profile figures, activists, artists, even celebrities began stepping into the spotlight not to condemn Mangione, but to support him. One of the earliest and most surprising appearances came from Chelsea Manning, the former US Army intelligence analyst famous for leaking classified documents. Manning attended Mangione's February 21st court hearing in New York, standing quietly among supporters wrapped in green scarves, the color that had become Luigi's unofficial symbol. Manning wasn't alone. Grassroots movements sprang up across the country, fueled by anger at skyrocketing healthcare costs, medical debt, and what many saw as corporate greed gone unchecked. On college campuses, teach-ins were organized under banners reading, "Luigi was pushed. Healthcare is a human right. No death penalty for victims of the system." A legal defense fund created by the December 4th Legal Committee, a group formed specifically to support Mangione, raised over $900,000 in just a few months. But support for Mangione wasn't without controversy. Critics slammed these movements, accusing them of glorifying violence. Politicians warned that framing Mangione as a martyr risked encouraging further acts of political harm. Cable news debates raged nightly. Was this about healthcare? Meanwhile, Mangione's defense team wasn't sitting idle. They pushed the narrative hard. Mangione wasn't a monster. He was broken, a man whose pain had been ignored, ridiculed, and finally weaponized by a society that treated healthcare like a business instead of a right. Every court appearance turned into a media circus. Supporters waved homemade signs outside the courthouse. Opponents showed up too, carrying photos of Brian Thompson and his grieving family, shouting "murderer." Tensions skyrocketed after one specific incident. Authorities revealed that during one court hearing, Mangione's legal team had accidentally passed him socks that contained hidden heart-shaped notes of support. Even something as small as a pair of socks became political. The message was clear. This wasn't just a murder trial anymore. It was a referendum on healthcare, on inequality, on how far Americans were willing to go when they felt unheard. And with the death penalty hanging over Mangione's head, the stakes were climbing higher by the day. In a case already overloaded with symbolism, it was almost inevitable that even Luigi Mangione's clothing would turn into a political weapon. At one of his most publicized court hearings, Luigi appeared wearing a simple but unmistakable green sweater. To the casual observer, it might have seemed like nothing, but for those paying attention, it was a signal. Green had already become the color of his supporters, a nod to the famous Nintendo character Luigi, but now twisted into a symbol of rebellion against corporate power. Prosecutors wasted no time seizing on it. In formal filings, they accused Mangione's defense team of fanning the flames of public attention, claiming the clothing choice was a calculated move to manipulate the jury pool and build public sympathy. And the green sweater wasn't the only controversy. At another hearing, Mangione's attorneys had provided him with a new pair of socks. But these weren't ordinary socks. Hidden inside were tiny heart-shaped notes of support slipped in by activists meant to boost his morale. Once discovered, prosecutors erupted in outrage. They accused the defense of using the courtroom, a place meant for cold, hard justice, as a stage for emotional manipulation. Mangiani's lawyers responded bluntly. It was an honest mistake. The notes, they claimed, were missed during standard searches. There was no grand conspiracy. But the damage was done. Photos of the green sweater, the hidden notes, and the accusations of courtroom theatrics ricocheted across social media and news outlets. Some saw it as brilliant symbolism. A young man standing defiant, even inside the machine trying to crush him. Others saw it as gross disrespect, a calculated insult to the court and the victims left behind. Every small detail, every piece of fabric, every courtroom whisper was now part of the war for public opinion. In a trial where life and death hung in the balance, even a sweater became a weapon, and the question kept echoing through the public arena in the fight between narrative and truth. Which one would win? Luigi Mangiani's defense team didn't just walk into court to plead not guilty. They walked in ready for war, led by Karen Friedman Agnifilo, a seasoned New York attorney known for handling high-stakes, high-profile cases. The team wasted no time laying out its strategy. Break the foundation, question everything, discredit the process. The very first motion they filed, a direct challenge to the arrest itself. They claimed Mangiani had been illegally stopped and searched by police in Altoona, Pennsylvania, that the officers had violated his constitutional rights by detaining him without probable cause. And if that motion held up in court, it could mean suppressing the gun, the fake ID, the claim of responsibility, and even the notebook found in his backpack, the very core of the prosecution's evidence. Then came the writings. Prosecutors pointed to Mangiani's notes, especially the so-called claim of responsibility and passages that condemned the health insurance industry as clear proof of premeditation. But the defense pushed back hard. They argued that these writings were ramblings, not a manifesto, the product of a young man in mental crisis, not someone orchestrating political violence. They even challenged the shell casings engraved with the words delay, deny, and depose. The defense called them allegorical nonsense, not a coded message, but a desperate cry for help twisted out of context by media and prosecutors alike. And while the state of New York focused on the terrorism charges, the federal case loomed even larger, with the Department of Justice preparing to seek the death penalty. That raised the stakes exponentially, because now Mangiani wasn't just fighting for innocence, he was fighting for his life. His attorneys requested the federal trial be held before the state proceedings, a rare move. Why? Because if they lost in federal court, where the death penalty was in play, they wanted to use that appeal process as leverage, long, drawn out, and politically sensitive. They knew the public was deeply divided on capital punishment. Behind closed doors, legal experts whispered what many feared. This case had become a test not just of one man's actions, but of the entire American legal system's ability to hold justice together under pressure. The prosecution had the firepower, but the defense had a narrative, one that painted Mangiani as the inevitable product of a society in decline, a tragic figure, a system casualty, and maybe, just maybe, a chance for the courtroom to become a battleground for something much bigger than guilt or innocence. When the Justice Department formally announced it would pursue the death penalty against Luigi Mangiani, the case crossed a point of no return. It wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It wasn't even just about Mangiani. It became a full-blown national moral crisis. On one side stood those who saw Mangiani as the very definition of evil, a man who had taken another human life in cold blood, a man who assassinated someone to make a political statement, a man who, no matter his grievances, had crossed a line that society could not allow to stand. For them, the death penalty wasn't just justified, it was necessary. A message to anyone thinking violence could fix systemic injustice. Families of healthcare workers, executives, and ordinary citizens rallied together under slogans like, "Justice means consequences. Murder isn't protest." Cable news panels spent night after night debating it. Was the death penalty about vengeance or about protecting society from a dangerous precedent? But on the other side of the divide, the arguments were just as fierce. Mangiane's supporters, a coalition of healthcare activists, anti-death penalty organizations, and some civil rights leaders, framed the federal move as state-sponsored hypocrisy. They pointed out that thousands of Americans die every year because of denied insurance claims, delayed treatments, and corporate decisions driven by profit over care. To them, Mangione was not a terrorist. He was a tragic consequence of a system that had long abandoned its people. Marches filled downtown streets in cities across America. Banners read, "Don't kill the symptom, fix the disease." Healthcare denied, lives denied. No death penalty, no more blood. Even international human rights groups weighed in, warning that executing Mangione could turn him into a martyr, igniting more instability, not less. For the federal prosecutors, however, the political risk was worth it. Privately, DOJ officials believed that anything less than the ultimate penalty would be seen as weakness, a green light for future acts of ideological violence. Public opinion polls showed the country almost evenly split. Half believed Mangione deserved death. Half believed killing him would only deepen the nation's wounds. It wasn't just a legal fight anymore. It was an existential crisis about who Americans were, what they valued, and how far they were willing to go to preserve the illusion of control. Every day that Mangione sat in a cell awaiting his trial dates, the pressure on the system grew heavier. And everyone, prosecutors, defense attorneys, journalists, activists, knew one thing for certain. Whatever the verdict, there would be no clean ending. Not for Luigi Mangione, and not for the country that created him. As winter turned into spring, the enormity of Luigi Mangione's legal battle fully came into view. He wasn't facing one trial, he was facing two. First, the state trial in New York. Murder charges, terrorism charges, weapons charges enough, if convicted, to guarantee Luigi would spend the rest of his life behind bars without parole. And then, the federal trial, where the stakes were even higher, where the government wasn't just seeking life imprisonment. They were seeking death. 2 different courtrooms, 2 different judges, 2 different juries. 2 battles that would decide not just Mangione's fate, but the future narrative that America would tell itself about this entire case. The question of which trial would happen first became an urgent chess match between the lawyers. Luigi's defense team pushed for the federal trial to be prioritized. Why? Because if the federal jury refused to sentence Mangione to death if they chose life in prison, instead it would give the defense massive moral leverage in the New York State case. It would paint Luigi not as a monster deserving ultimate punishment, but as a tragic figure who had already received the harshest judgment possible. But prosecutors wanted the opposite. They preferred to go to trial in New York, first lock Mangione away for life, then pursue the death penalty federally without the risk of jury sympathy. Meanwhile, the logistics were staggering. The federal case alone promised to last months, involving expert witnesses, psychiatric evaluations, constitutional challenges, and hundreds of hours of evidence presentation. And all of it under a microscope. Every statement, every cross-examination, every piece of evidence, televised, live tweeted, debated on cable news and TikTok alike. The judge overseeing Mangiane's federal case set a tentative trial start for early 2026, but legal experts warned. With endless pre-trial motions, appeals, and procedural fights, it could drag on far longer. Every extra day Luigi spent in a cell wasn't just waiting. It was living under the crushing uncertainty of whether he would die at the hands of the system he had spent his life raging against. Two trials, two possible outcomes, and two futures, neither of them offering any real escape. The justice system had caught him. Now it was preparing to decide what would be left of him. By the time Luigi Mangiane's trials were looming on the calendar, one thing had become painfully clear. America was not united on what his case meant. If anything, the shooting of Brian Thompson and everything that came after it ripped open wounds that had been festering for decades. In one version of the story, Mangione was a terrorist, a man who believed violence was a shortcut to justice. Someone who shattered the basic social contract that says disagreements are solved with words, not bullets. In another version, he was a symptom, a mirror reflecting back a system so cruel, so indifferent to suffering, that it was only a matter of time before someone broke under the weight. Cable news turned it into political sport. Conservative pundits railed against Mangione as a domestic insurgent, linking him to online radicalism and calling for the maximum penalty. Progressive voices pointed to the staggering medical debt crushing millions of Americans and asked, if the system worked, would he have ever picked up a gun? Healthcare became the flashpoint, but underneath it was something bigger, deeper. Trust. Trust in the courts, trust in the media, trust in corporate institutions, trust in the idea that the American dream was still possible without violence. And for many, Luigi Mangiane's story was proof that trust was already broken. Support rallies continued to grow not just in New York or Pennsylvania, but across college campuses, in union halls, at town squares. Young Americans, burdened by debt, inequality, and the high cost of simply being alive, saw Mangione's collapse as a warning, not an isolated act. Meanwhile, Thompson's death sparked fierce counter-protests, where families held up pictures of victims of senseless violence, chanting, "No justification for murder. Justice for Brian Thompson." The courtrooms weren't the only battlegrounds anymore. The streets had become battlefields, two symbolic wars fought with banners, slogans, and bitter, exhausted voices. Even international outlets began covering the case, framing it as a story about a wealthy superpower crumbling from within. And through it all, Luigi Mangione remained largely silent. No public statements, no interviews, just a figure trapped between what he had done and what America had decided he symbolized. In the end, this wasn't just about a murder. It wasn't even just about healthcare. It was about a nation grappling with itself and realizing, maybe too late, that the fracture lines were already too deep to hide. When the first news alerts hit, UnitedHealthcare CEO shot dead in Manhattan. It was easy to see it as just another headline, another crime, another tragedy in a country drowning in violence. But as the details emerged, as Luigi Mangione's writings were uncovered, as America's fractured healthcare system was dragged into the spotlight once again, a darker, heavier question began to creep in. Was this inevitable? Was Luigi Mangione simply an outlier, a disturbed mind who snapped in isolation? Or was he the canary in the coal mine, the first loud, violent echo of a society quietly tearing itself apart? A system where medical debt is the leading cause of bankruptcy, where millions of Americans avoid hospitals out of fear of the bills, where life and death decisions are sometimes made by insurance adjusters, not doctors. In his battered notebook, Mangione wrote of being trapped, of fighting invisible enemies, of screaming for help into a void that never answered. It's tempting to look away, to call him a monster, lock him away, and move on. But what if the truth is more complicated? What if Mangione wasn't born a killer, but shaped slowly and painfully by a system that measured his worth in dollars and found him lacking? This doesn't excuse what he did. Brian Thompson's death was a tragedy, a life stolen, a family shattered forever. But pretending Mangione's rage came from nowhere, pretending the cracks in the system didn't push him closer to the edge, would be a lie. In the end, the story of Luigi Mangione isn't just about one act of violence. It's about the thousands of silent collapses happening across the country every day. Collapses that don't make the news until it's too late. And whether Mangione is remembered as a terrorist, a symptom, or a warning, one truth remains. A society that ignores its broken parts eventually gets broken people. As of now, Luigi Mangione sits behind bars, awaiting two massive trials. The dates are set. The prosecutors are ready. The defense has sharpened every motion, every argument. But whatever happens inside those courtrooms, whether Mangione receives a life sentence or faces death at the hands of the federal government, the truth is there are no winners. Brian Thompson is gone, his life cut short by an act of cold violence. His family will never see him walk back through the door. His colleagues, his friends are left to piece together a future without him. Luigi Mangione, once a bright student, a traveler, a mind brimming with potential, now faces a future measured in concrete walls and steel bars. A young man reduced to a case number. A defendant, an accused murderer, two lives shattered, two families broken, and a nation forced, however briefly, to look in the mirror and ask itself uncomfortable questions. What Mangione allegedly did was wrong, unforgivable, but the system he railed against, the world that pushed him deeper into hopelessness, remains standing, unchanged, unmoved. In a year, maybe two, Luigi Mangione's name will vanish from headlines. Another case will take its place, another tragedy, another burst of outrage. But for those who have really listened to this story, who have looked past the crime scene photos and the court sketches and the hashtags, the memory of what happened here will linger, not just because of who was lost, but because of what it revealed. America's fractures run deep, and every so often someone broken, desperate, furious falls straight through them. Mangione's case was never just about one man versus one CEO. It was about the nation cracking under its own weight. And as the trials loom ahead, one quiet question remains. How many more cracks can a country take before something bigger finally breaks? In the end, the story of Luigi Mangione isn't just a headline. It's not just a courtroom drama. It's not just a tragedy for two families. It's a reflection of something bigger, something all of us are living inside every single day. A world where systems grind down the very people they're supposed to serve. A world where silence festers into rage, and sometimes that rage breaks loose. There are no heroes here, no simple villains, only consequences, heavy, irreversible consequences. Brian Thompson is gone. Luigi Mangione may soon face the ultimate penalty. And the rest of us are left to ask ourselves the hardest question of all. What happens to a society when desperation finally drowns out hope? The trial is coming. the verdict will arrive, but the deeper answers, the ones about who we are and what we are willing to accept, those answers are still waiting, and the clock is still ticking.